This man is absolutely ruthless. To complete the mission assigned by the FBI, he not only dared to take on the 25mm Gatling cannon of an F-35 fighter jet, but even rammed a helicopter with a car. His audacity and cruelty are terrifying, chilling even the most hardened assassins. Everyone thought this man would surely complete the task, but they didn't expect the mastermind behind it to be even more formidable. In his scheme, the U.S. White House was reduced to ashes. He even extended his tentacles to America's top secrets, plotting to control the nation's destiny. Who is this extraordinarily powerful figure behind the curtain? The story begins with the hacker, Lucy, before us. The moment she typed the last character, all computers at the Federal Bureau of Investigation went dark. Facing this sudden incident, the investigation department colleague informed his superior, clearly, a hacker had breached their system. The director of the FBI immediately flew into a rage, feeling the opponent was challenging the Bureau's authority. So he instantly ordered the IT department to work overtime to find the culprit. Meanwhile, unlike the anxious agents, Officer John took advantage of his leave to visit his daughter Winnie's university, hoping to mend their relationship. Unexpectedly, this put them in an even more awkward situation. Confronted by John's sudden appearance, Winnie was completely caught off guard. Seeing her relationship with her boyfriend Taylor busted by her father, she was instantly ashamed and furious, even calling her father by his first name in front of Taylor. However, Winnie didn't realize that this impulsive act provoked John's defiance. Seeing her refuse to acknowledge their father-daughter relationship, he reviewed Taylor's background right in front of her. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, Winnie finally brought herself to say, "Dad." It was only then that Taylor realized John's identity. He might have been expected to feel awkward about this, but Taylor was surprisingly astonished simply because Winnie had once told him her biological father had passed away long ago. But why had the father-daughter relationship deteriorated to this extent? It turned out that due to his identity as a police officer, John had lacked time to spend with his children since they were young. After he and his wife divorced, the children who were already not close to him grew even more distant. That's why the father-daughter relationship became so strained. Ultimately, this trip John initiated to ease tensions ended with the two of them parting unhappily once again due to the inconvenient timing. Watching Winnie's retreating figure through the window, John didn't know how to salvage their relationship. However, before he could come up with a solution, a phone call dragged John back to reality. His superior wanted to assign him an urgent mission. Seeing the urgency in the caller's voice, John suppressed the displeasure welling up inside him. Unexpectedly, his superior tasked him with finding a hacker named Matthew. As a veteran police detective, he was only responsible for solving major cases, so John immediately felt he was being mocked by his superior. Already annoyed, he disregarded his superior's reputation and directly refused the assignment. John told the caller it was 3 a.m. This minor issue should be left to the new officers, and he needed to go home and catch up on sleep. Hearing these impatient words, the superior didn't get angry. He had long been familiar with John's explosive temper. According to the superior's explanation, this matter was not handled by the police department, but an assistance request delegated by the FBI. The Bureau specifically requested a veteran detective to find Matthew. Given the agent's cautious attitude towards the target, the superior speculated that Matthew's identity was not merely that of a hacker. And from his superior's words, John also understood the gravity of the situation. After he calmed down, his superior ordered John to act quickly, locate the target, and escort him to the Hoover building. And so, at 3 a.m, John drove off, beginning this reluctant journey. John was completely unaware that this seemingly routine mission was fraught with danger. Would he be able to complete the mission and bring Matthew back safely? At the same time, Matthew at home was still unaware of what he was about to face, still typing complex code on his computer. However, he was completely oblivious that 5 assassins were already monitoring him outside his apartment. Immediately after they began to execute their plan, just when they thought Matthew would be caught in the act, a knock at the door interrupted the assassins' operation. The person who arrived was John. However, Matthew was extremely wary and didn't open the door immediately. Only when John showed his police badge did he open the door a small crack. Clearly, Matthew disliked the police. But under the coercion of the FBI's dispatch order, Matthew still pretended to cooperate with John, feigning packing his backpack to leave with him. Then, taking advantage of John's lack of attention, Matthew immediately ran towards the window intending to escape. Unexpectedly, because the window hadn't been opened for a long time, and the mechanisms were rusty, it only opened halfway. His escape plan was thus discovered by John. However, before Matthew could feel regret, a bullet pierced the window glass, causing him to scream out instantly. Fortunately, in the crisis, John reacted quickly and pulled him down, allowing Matthew to narrowly escape death. But before they could catch their breath, the assassins realized they had been exposed and immediately stopped concealing themselves. A dense hail of bullets instantly covered both men. John understood that constantly hiding wasn't a solution. Therefore, to create an opportunity for Matthew to escape, he poked his head out to pinpoint the assassins' locations. The assassins spotted him and immediately pulled the trigger. Fortunately, John, a veteran police detective, was completely unharmed, but Matthew, who had never been in combat, was suffering. Just when they thought escape was impossible, John used that initial probe to roughly determine the assassins' positions. So he decisively opened fire towards the window. Taking advantage of the assassins dodging the shots, he quickly pulled Matthew to escape the room. But how could the assassins let them leave so easily? They quickly rushed into Matthew's room, but nothing escaped John's eyes. He threw a fire extinguisher and immediately shot it 3 times, taking down one of the charging assassins. At the same time, the remaining assassins once again launched a fierce attack on the 2 men. John reluctantly had to retreat with Matthew back into the room. Seeing no movement inside the room, an assassin immediately kicked down the door and fired wildly inside. But the target was still nowhere to be seen. Just as the assassin lowered his guard, John quickly pulled the trigger. Unexpectedly, the opponent was still not killed by the bullet. The 2 sides were locked in a stalemate. In the blink of an eye, John ran out of ammunition. Seeing the assassin closing in, John had no choice but to fight desperately to cover Matthew's retreat. Just at this critical moment, an explosion occurred in the assassin's room. It turned out that Matthew's doll had fallen to the floor due to the broken door, accidentally activating the explosive device on the computer. The sniper above, seeing this, thought Matthew had been killed by his comrades, so he gathered his weapon, preparing to retreat. Meanwhile, although John didn't know what was happening, he quickly pulled Matthew along and hurried away. However, just as the 2 were about to drive away, another assassin spotted them and immediately tried to stop John. In this dangerous situation, fortunately, John quickly controlled the steering wheel and used a trash can to knock the assassin flying. Just when they thought they had finally escaped, the sniper reappeared right in front of them. Seeing the assassin clinging to them like a bloodsucker, John didn't panic and immediately slammed the gas pedal. He used an obstacle on the side of the road to fling the assassin away. However, John and Matthew were unaware that after such a heavy collision, the 2 assassins were still alive and had reported the target was rescued by the police to their boss, Thomas. Thomas was furious after hearing the news and prepared to dispatch a helicopter to help the assassins eliminate Matthew. But why was he so determined to kill him? It was also at this moment that the FBI noticed something unusual, realizing that the 7 victims murdered were all top hackers. The director's instinct told him that a much larger conspiracy was certainly hidden behind this case. So he immediately ordered his subordinates to begin investigating the hard drives of all 7 deceased victims, determined to find the mastermind. Meanwhile, John and Matthew were still unaware of the situation at the FBI. After a long journey, they finally reached Washington. John thought his mission was over, but unexpectedly, when the program compiled by the hackers was activated, the traffic lights on the streets quickly changed color. Not only were Matthew and John unable to escape, but all vehicles on the streets also had accidents. John realized then that the traffic system had been paralyzed. To prevent further incidents on the road, John immediately took Matthew out of the car to proceed on foot. However, as the 2 hurried along, they failed to notice a helicopter continuously circling overhead, and their main target was them. Subsequently, the FBI also received reports about the local traffic system being paralyzed. Before the superior could figure out a solution, other regions reported that their traffic systems had also been attacked. To ensure the safety of employees, large office buildings immediately began evacuating people. But Thomas's revenge was not over. Before the government could resolve this incident, Thomas immediately ordered the next hacker to make the stock market system completely lose control. To soothe the panic among investors, the director immediately ordered top financial experts to intervene and restore the stock market data to normal. At the same time, John finally brought Matthew to the FBI. However, judging by the director's attitude, the 2 had clearly arrived at a bad time. But before they could figure out what had happened, the news on TV gave them the answer. Watching the reporter's narration, Matthew's expression was extremely grim. But before he could recover, he learned from the director about the deaths of the 7 other hackers. Matthew realized he had made a huge mistake, immediately regretted it, and wanted to inform John about the mastermind's next plan. Before John could respond, the director standing nearby became extremely angry. He threatened Matthew not to interfere with the federal work unless Matthew admitted to being a member of the terrorist group. Facing the director's threat, although Matthew initially intended to confess under the superior's warning, he could only confirm that everything was just his speculation. Seeing the director using his authority to bully someone, John couldn't suppress his short temper. He spoke directly about the assassins, chasing the 2 of them, emphasizing that Matthew was definitely crucial to the person who planned the system infiltration. Seeing John's increasingly agitated state, the director reluctantly conceded. He immediately assigned people to escort the 2 to the Department of Homeland Security, where a hacker was in charge of investigating this case. Afterward, under the escort of the agents, they quickly got into the car and headed to the destination. They thought the group would arrive soon, but unexpectedly, due to the traffic system paralysis, vehicle speed was very slow. To quickly reach the destination, the agent had to call for assistance from the Washington police. However, no one expected that this very call would help the enemy determine their location. By monitoring the agent's call, the hacker successfully pinpointed Matthew's location. Subsequently, the helicopter, with Lucy's assistance, began flying towards the target. Meanwhile, the agents were still unaware of the imminent danger. Seeing Matthew using non-stop chatter to conceal his fear, John stopped pretending. He immediately demanded that the other party tell the truth. Matthew was extremely surprised. He didn't know when he had been exposed, but thinking of Thomas's betrayal, he told John everything. It turned out Thomas had planned this cyber attack. He had hired 8 top hackers, including Matthew, to directly paralyze the U.S.'s traffic and power systems. But he was afraid of being exposed because of it, so he hired assassins to eliminate the 8 hackers to conceal his criminal evidence. Just as the 2 were talking, the navigation voice in the car suddenly changed. Matthew immediately recognized this female voice. She was the one who had contacted him to create the virus program. John immediately grabbed the radio and exposed Lucy's deception with just 1 sentence. Seeing the opponent was so clever, Thomas became interested. He tried to lure John with money, but was flatly refused by the detective. However, Thomas was not angry simply because his goal of delaying the agents had been achieved. As soon as the helicopter pressed the attack button, a dense hail of bullets immediately covered the group. The agents quickly returned fire, but since the assassins had the advantage from above, the situation was extremely unfavorable for the police. The agents were forced to helplessly tell Matthew and John to retreat first. Could they safely reach their destination? Soon after, the assassin realized the target had disappeared and quickly flew the helicopter in pursuit of the 2. Facing the opponent's relentless pursuit, John didn't panic. He immediately drove the car into a fire hydrant. The powerful stream of water directly knocked one assassin off the helicopter. Next to escape the assassin's pursuit, John quickly drove towards the tunnel. Thomas noticed his intention and immediately ordered the hacker to infiltrate the tunnel system. Subsequently, following the misleading instructions on the signs, vehicles from the opposite direction drove the wrong way inside the tunnel. In this critical situation, fortunately, John reacted quickly, turned the car around, and avoided an accident. But how could Thomas let go so easily? He continued to order the hacker to switch off the tunnel lights. John and Matthew felt something was wrong and quickly got out of the car and ran. Seeing Matthew almost get hit by a speeding car, John quickly rushed forward and pulled him away, saving his life. However, just as the 2 were breathing a sigh of relief, a silver car flew into the air. Fortunately, 2 other cars appeared just in time to block this fatal collision. But then a large truck lost control due to the accident. Seeing this, the 2 realized the danger and ran for their lives, barely managing to hide behind a stone pillar. Just as Matthew and John looked up, panting, they saw the helicopter still waiting for them at the tunnel exit. This sight completely enraged John. Then, ignoring Matthew's attempts to stop him, he quickly returned to the police car, slammed the gas pedal, and drove straight towards the tunnel exit, determined to strike a fatal blow against the assassins. The opposite side also realized his intention and quickly opened fire. But facing the enemy's fierce attack, John did not back down. Finally, as the police car was about to exit the tunnel, he seized the moment and ducked down below the car. The police car, propelled by speed, flew directly into the air and slammed into the helicopter above. The assassin who miraculously survived was utterly stunned by the scene before him. Only now did he realize what a formidable opponent he had encountered. He immediately reported the situation to Thomas. Seeing the catastrophic situation, Thomas, to prevent the plan from failing immediately, ordered Lucy to activate Phase 3 of the plan. Meanwhile, Matthew was full of admiration for John's brave actions. He couldn't believe the officer had managed to crash the helicopter. However, just as the two were catching their breath, Thomas's people began to act with the Phase 3 infiltration. And facing Thomas's conspiracy, could John and Matthew successfully stop it? After a short rest, Matthew and John continued their journey. They finally arrived at the Department of Homeland Security, but the scene here was similar to the FBI. The bewildered agents did not have time to receive them. John reluctantly took Matthew outside, wanting to call the director to report the situation, but Matthew stopped him. This was because the hacker could track their location through phone signals. John had to use the radio to contact the director. He recounted their experience being chased by assassins and revealed the hacker's next plan. Upon hearing this, the director immediately looked at the screen. All TVs were broadcasting news about the White House. Only then did he realize Matthew's words were true. However, before the director could regret it, the White House on the screen suddenly exploded from a bomb. This scene terrified everyone present. Even John didn't expect the opponent to be so outrageous. He immediately headed to the White House to check. Fortunately, the White House was still intact. However, immediately after John informed the director of the news, and with the hackers' continued escalation, the communication system was also rendered inoperative. Seeing the situation developing into something increasingly terrifying, Matthew deeply regretted his initial actions. He knew Thomas's next plan was definitely to take control of the U.S. power grid. So, to make up for his mistake, he immediately informed John. The two quickly drove to the power center. Could they successfully thwart Thomas's conspiracy? At the same time, Lucy, using her fake agent identity, had successfully infiltrated the power center, preparing to hack the U.S. electrical system. However, just as they were operating, Matthew and John also reached their destination. Seeing the security room full of corpses, John knew they were one step too late. Fortunately, Lucy and her accomplice had not yet made their move. So they quickly located the control room via a map, preparing to enter and stop them. However, just as the two began to act, Thomas's men also spotted them on the surveillance screen. The two sides then met at the corner. Fortunately, the opponent was no match for John. After just a few moves, John knocked the opponent down on the spot. Having resolved this incident, the two continued toward the control room. Simultaneously, the FBI was also taking action. They thought they could provide some assistance to John and Matthew, but unexpectedly the subordinate reported to the director that because the infiltrating terrorists were constantly moving, the investigation room could not pinpoint their location. Meanwhile, seeing Lucy's infiltration program nearing completion, fortunately, in the nick of time, the two finally made it up to the 4th floor. John subdued Lucy, while Matthew seized the opportunity to decrypt the virus. Just when they thought Thomas's plan had failed, Lucy still refused to give up. Taking advantage of John's lapse in attention, the two immediately engaged in combat. But what surprised John was that her combat skills exceeded his. In just a few moves, he was beaten and unable to resist. Seeing this, Lucy calmly walked away, intending to restart the infiltration plan. But how could John let her succeed? He strained to stand up and grappled with the opponent. Lucy was caught off guard and taken by surprise. The fight ended when John flung her away. Just as Matthew and John were breathing a sigh of relief, the unconscious Lucy woke up. Seeing the person who had pulled her hair, her anger completely erupted. Lucy quickly subdued Matthew, threatening him to restore the virus program. At the same time, John downstairs struggled to stand up. Seeing the employee parking lot in the distance, he immediately came up with a new plan. He then drove a nearby car, slammed the gas pedal, drove straight into a ventilation shaft, and launched himself up to the 4th floor. As for Lucy, she remained completely oblivious. Facing Matthew's fear, she continued to threaten him to implant the virus immediately. Seeing the infiltration program about to be activated, fortunately, in the nick of time, John drove the car straight into the control room. The two sides once again plunged into a dramatic confrontation. To defeat Lucy, John did not hesitate to gamble his life. He slammed the accelerator, ramming the car through the elevator shaft. They thought both would perish, but luckily the elevator space was too narrow and the car got wedged in mid-air just in time. However, John's situation was still dire. Following the momentum, Lucy climbed along the car to the top and the two resumed combat. The car also continued to fall deeper into the shaft due to the change in gravity. In this moment of danger, John seized the opponent's momentary weakness and knocked her unconscious. However, before he could relax, another assassin arrived at the elevator shaft in time. He fired continuously towards John. In the nick of time, Matthew arrived and used a pipe to knock out the assassin. Just when they thought the danger was averted, the car couldn't hold out and continued to fall. Seeing this, John quickly grabbed the steel cable and narrowly escaped death, while Lucy fell to the bottom with the car and died instantly. The two then returned to the power control room. John understood the virus program was about to be activated and asked Matthew if he was confident he could solve it. Matthew dared not guarantee it, but promised John he could prolong the virus's onset time. At the same time, Thomas on the other side felt something was wrong. Everyone was ready, but Lucy was still completely unreachable. Moreover, according to the controlling hacker's report, the power security system was rebooting. Upon hearing this, a bad premonition arose in Thomas, so he hurriedly called Lucy to check in. Unexpectedly, the one who answered him was John's taunt. John was unaware that his brazen words had completely enraged Thomas. An even greater crisis was waiting for both of them. Thomas was furious upon learning of the failed plan. In his rage, he immediately ordered the hacker to redirect all natural gas pipelines toward the power center. And John and Matthew were still unaware of the impending danger. Matthew found a photo of Thomas and sent it to the FBI's computer. The director saw it and recognized the person. It turned out Thomas was once a federal cybersecurity expert. He had discovered a loophole in the national defense system and proposed a solution. Unexpectedly, the federal director not only rejected it, but also ruined his reputation and froze his assets. Because of this, Thomas held a grudge against the FBI and planned this cyber attack. Then, before the two could figure out a solution, Matthew detected the smell of gas. Knowing something was wrong, he immediately led John to flee. But immediately after an accident occurred. Fortunately, they managed to hide inside a small truck in time, narrowly escaping death. But this also made Matthew realize how terrifying the opponent they were facing was. He felt that their efforts were now meaningless. Unexpectedly, while the two were arguing and with the damage to the power system, the city was instantly plunged into darkness. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, Matthew suddenly remembered the hacker genius Warlock, whom he knew. Perhaps he would have a solution. So to stop Thomas's plan, the two drove the helicopter Lucy left behind and quickly flew to Warlock's home. Following Matthew's directions, they quickly reached their destination. With Warlock's help, the virus code Matthew created was quickly located at the Woodlawn branch building. Not only did that location have redundant power sources, but it was also equipped with a large cooling system. However, before the three could guess Thomas's purpose, Thomas's people detected that the Woodlawn building system had been infiltrated, immediately after the hacker accessed the intruder's computer. Through Warlock's camera, Thomas finally realized Matthew and John had escaped. Recalling John's provocation, he immediately came up with a perfect way to take revenge on his opponent. Subsequently, the hacker quickly connected with Warlock. John, still unaware of the danger, loudly provoked Thomas. But when his daughter Winnie appeared on the computer, John lost his earlier bravado. He decided to leave immediately to save his daughter. Matthew, to repay John's life-saving grace, offered to go along despite his fear. The two thus began their rescue journey. What fate awaited them? At the same time, Winnie was still trapped in the elevator due to the power outage. Thomas's men found her. Using fake documents, they successfully deceived her trust. Waiting until the fish took the bait, they dropped their disguise. Winnie then realized she had fallen into a trap. But due to the overwhelming number of men, her struggling was futile. Meanwhile, John and Matthew smoothly arrived at the Woodlawn building. They took advantage of the cover of night and quickly broke into the building's basement. After a series of actions by Matthew, the FBI successfully received a signal from the Woodlawn building. Only then did the director understand Thomas's goal. Woodlawn contained all of America's financial data and government secrets. Once the headquarters was attacked, the Woodlawn system would immediately download all data to the server upon receiving the command. At that point, Thomas could take the opportunity to infiltrate and transfer these secrets to a hard drive. Then the opponent could not only steal hundreds of millions of US dollars, but the destiny of the entire nation would also be in his hands. So, To prevent Thomas's conspiracy, the director immediately dispatched a large number of agents to support the two men. At the same time, the assassin who received Thomas's order found John and Matthew. A major confrontation immediately erupted between the two sides. The fight concluded with the assassin being severely wounded. However, facing John's interrogation, the opponent still refused to reveal any information. Just as the situation reached a deadlock, Thomas casually inquired about the assassin's operation results. Knowing John had made it to the third floor, he hadn't expected the opponent to be so formidable. So, he quickly dispatched the next assassin, promising him that Lucy's bounty would also be split with him after eliminating John. Would the final outcome be what Thomas wished for? At the same time, Matthew was accidentally pushed down while John and the assassin were fighting. Thinking death awaited him, Matthew unexpectedly found the Woodlawn system, taking advantage of it to reinforce the data security program. But just as he was concentrating on the task, Thomas's subordinates captured Matthew and took him to where Winnie was being held. Meanwhile, the dispatched assassin found John. Relying on his physical strength, he quickly closed in on John. A major confrontation immediately erupted between the two sides. However, this assassin was clearly much more formidable. After just a few moves, John was on the defensive, and his gun even fell during the fight. Just as he tried to retrieve his weapon, the assassin gave John no chance and immediately attacked with his gun. In the nick of time, John quickly opened the air conditioning vent. Thanks to this, he narrowly escaped death. However, the danger was not yet averted. The aircraft sent by the FBI was spotted by Thomas. Knowing his whereabouts had been exposed, he immediately took Matthew and Winnie and prepared to retreat. In this critical moment, John thankfully arrived just in time. He jumped onto the truck with Thomas and began the pursuit. Along the way, John seized the opportunity, knocked out the truck driver while he was distracted, and successfully gained control of the truck. He then accelerated and sped towards Thomas and his accomplices. Thomas was still threatening Matthew to decrypt the Woodlawn system. Thinking the timid Matthew would comply, he was surprised by the hacker's unusual resistance. This was because Matthew understood that Thomas could only rely on him to decrypt the system and therefore would not kill him. Conversely, once he helped break the code, the opponent would certainly turn on him and kill him. Thomas was infuriated that his trick had been seen through. But before he could think of a solution, his accomplices detected the anomaly in the truck. John, still unaware he had been exposed, immediately contacted. The director reported Thomas's location and requested assistance. At the same time, seeing the situation worsen, Thomas came up with a new plan. He ordered the hacker to infiltrate the pilot's communication system. Thomas then pretended to be a superior officer and ordered the pilot to attack the truck John was in. Fortunately, John successfully dodged the attack with his skilled driving. However, before he could curse the pilot, the aftershock of the explosion caused the overpass to collapse. John could only continue to evade. Seeing his resilience, the pilot closed in and launched a fierce attack. Facing the sudden attack, John had to adjust the direction of the truck. Narrowly escaping death, he couldn't help but curse the pilot. Unexpectedly, the opponent seemed to have heard the call and launched a new round of attacks on John. Under the aircraft's assault, John's truck was decimated, with only half of the large vehicle remaining. Thinking he would give up, John unexpectedly looked at the collapsed overpass ahead, quickly reversed, wanting to use the momentum to fly to the opposite side. But the pilot realized John's intention and continued to attack him. With the truck completely totaled, John was in danger. Fortunately, in the nick of time, he seized the opportunity and leaped onto the fighter jet. However, after the recent battle, the plane was also damaged and about to explode. Seeing this, the pilot immediately activated the ejection seat, but John was not so lucky. The out-of-control fighter jet spun continuously in the air, but John didn't give up. With extraordinary courage, he successfully escaped. Afterward, ignoring his injuries, John continued on his journey to rescue his daughter. At the same time, Thomas and his accomplices arrived at an abandoned warehouse. But before the group could rest, Thomas continued to threaten Matthew to decrypt the system. The hacker, however, remained resolute in his refusal. But this time, Thomas came up with a new ace up his sleeve. Seeing Thomas's conspiracy about to succeed, fortunately, in the nick of time, John quickly arrived with a gun. He eliminated Thomas's subordinates one by one. Seeing her father risk his life to rush to her, Winnie was now filled with deep remorse. However, just as the father and daughter were having an emotional moment, the assassin nearby disregarded all etiquette. Taking advantage of John's distraction, he shot him in the arm. John's gun was sent flying as well. Thomas saw this and was smug, immediately preparing to shoot John dead. In this dangerous moment, Winnie risked her life to escape the assassin's grip and kicked the gun towards John, but failed. And this action completely enraged Thomas. He suddenly had the idea to play a cruel game immediately, forcing John in front of the computer, intending to make John witness the moment the plan succeeded. However, just as Thomas let down his guard, John, to stop his plan, did not hesitate to pull the trigger on himself. The bullet immediately passed through John and struck Thomas's body. The assassin saw this and tried to counterattack, but was knocked down by Matthew on the spot. And thanks to this moment, the father and daughter reconciled. At the same time, the federal rescue forces finally arrived in time to rescue the three from the abandoned warehouse. Winnie and Matthew also developed feelings for each other because of this. What ending awaited them? The movie ends as the ambulance drives away. From causing a series of highway accidents to scrambling stock market data to finally plotting to shut down the Eastern power grid, paralyzing America's critical infrastructure, every step precisely touched upon the digital Achilles heel of modern society. This crisis setup broke free from the constraints of traditional action films, relying only on mere fighting, allowing the audience not only to watch an entertaining movie, but also to feel the chilling sense of the vulnerability of the digital age. The value of a movie lies in its reputation, and the value of a movie review lies in its sentiment. Today's story ends here. Thank you all for watching. Let me know what you thought of this movie in the comments below.